Hi, my name is Rachel Snyder, and I'm here today to answer question number 2 regarding um, the media's really influence on women in politics. And so, just to get us started, there's the quote from Misrepresentation, and it says that 10.45 hours a day of our lives are influenced by the media. And so I think that this really goes to show what a huge effect the media plays in all of our lives. And so it really is important how the media is representing women, and specifically women in politics. So that being said, the first question that I'm going to answer are the 3 ways that the media obstructs women's representation in politics. And so I think that these are through gendered frames, through continuing the gendered psyche, and finally by their use of double binds. So in terms of gendered frames, those are defined as the number of frames that the media uses in framing women candidates that aren't applied to their male counterparts. And so they may include excessive coverage of a woman candidate's appearance, and I think that that is especially visible in Sarah Palin's campaign, and the whole idea that beauty is beastly, and essentially that because she was so beautiful, she couldn't be intelligent or she wasn't taken seriously, even before she made some of the, mistakes that occurred later in her campaign. And the second thing that falls under gender frames are greater use of first names. And so in Murray, there's a lot of talk about how the warmth and familiarity associated with the use of a first name are of limited benefit at best in a presidential race. And I think especially when considering all of the fights that women have in order to appear competent in these campaigns, that definitely when the media uses their first name rather than their last, like a male counterpart, it further serves to just delegitimize women and make them seem like they are, not as qualified to run in a race. So the effect of using these frames it's a subtle but powerful way of undermining the authority of women candidates. And so this definitely does not help women in their races in presidential or whatever political campaign they may be running for. Additionally, the second thing is gendered psyche. And so, we're all aware from the Lawless and Fox book that men are twice as likely as women to consider themselves very qualified to seek an elective position. And women are less likely than men to consider running for office, and women are less likely than men to even express interest in running for office. And so I think that the media plays a role in this gendered psyche, and kind of continuing to enforce for women that they're not well qualified enough or politics aren't for them, even though they definitely are. And so I think there's 2 ways that the media does this. The first is through the masculinized ethos that we've been talking about. And so politics are framed in masculine terms by the media, according to Lawless and Fox. And so this leads women to think that they're less qualified than their male counterparts. And furthermore, Kornbluth has this quote where she says that deeply embedded patterns of traditional gender socialization pervade United States society. So I really think that goes to show how the media kind of continues these gender norms and continues these stereotypes when really they're not true, and they act as a hindrance for women. And finally, the idea of double bind. So a double bind is combined effect of gender stereotyping and gendered media framing, and it's kind of, either way you lose. You're either too masculine or too feminine, or too young or too old, and really what this does is it portrays women negatively no matter how they choose to represent themselves. And whereas their male counterparts might be planning these strategic campaigns so they come up as positive in the media as possible, sometimes women just really don't have that option, and that also is a hindrance that the media kind of puts them in these boxes where there's no way out or no right answer. However, the media isn't always negative, and I think that there are a lot of opportunities for media coverage of women political candidates that can be really helpful and really beneficial for women. And so the 2 things that I focused on are coverage of women and showing women that it's possible to run for political positions, and then representing the different strengths that women in politics can bring to the table. So in terms of coverage of women, in Debbie Walsh's Washington Post article, she talks about how with more women in leadership positions, the vision of a female president becomes easier to imagine. And I definitely agree with her, but I think that it's not only more women in leadership positions, but the media reporting on those women and reporting on women running in races. And so, the media can kind of further the gendered psyche on one hand, but it also has the opportunity to counteract it by simply giving women candidates significant press and showing people that they can run a successful campaign and they can be successful in office. And I think, we talk a lot about how it's very important to have a support group and a mentor. And so if the media is already reporting on women running, then it makes it that much easier just to have that conversation and start that conversation. And finally, in terms of representing the different strengths that women in politics can bring to the table, I think a great example was the Steinhauer article that talks about women in the Senate and how it's the women who are more willing to negotiate and to cross party lines. And so if the media were reporting on this aspect of women in leadership roles, then maybe there wouldn't be such a negative connotation of what a powerful woman looks like, and it would encourage more women also to run for politics because they really feel they can make changes and they really are the ones affecting change, especially at the national level. So finally, if I were to run a campaign, my 3 suggestions for my candidate would be sufficient experience, likability, and finally negative advertising. And so by sufficient experience, I think we've seen that women's credibility is often questioned. I think this was a huge issue for Sarah Palin in her campaign. And so it's really important that you establish credibility as a presidential candidate and especially as a woman. And so if you have sufficient experience and you have a very substantial resume, I think that this credibility process is a lot easier because the media can't really argue with hard facts and people can't really question you for that. And then once you establish that credibility and that experience, then you can work on likability. And I think, unfortunately, women do have to walk this very narrow line between being tough and also meeting the societal expectations of warmth and femininity. And so, if you present this very tough, very experienced persona, then you also need to have charisma, need to be relatable to people. And I think one of the main kind of women who this worked for was Bachelet and how she connected with Chileans from all walks of life. So this is something that I would really work on my candidate with in order for her to be successful. And finally, negative advertising. So we've learned in our political science 301 classes how effective negative advertising can be. And according to that Fredkin article, negative commercials are less effective at depressing evaluations of women candidates compared to males. So if my candidate was running with all male constituents, I would encourage negative campaigning because that mudslinging is not going to negatively affect us as much as our opponents. So thank you so much for listening. That concludes my video, and I look forward to hearing some of yours as well.